And welcome back. We have been joined on set by Leandra Cho-Ricketts. She's the chairperson of the Spawning Aggregation Working Group. And we also have Virginia Burns Perez. She's the secretary of that working group. And as we mentioned prior to the commercial break, we're going to be discussing the 2016 Spawning Aggregation Review. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
So we were talking earlier just now, and I was telling you how much I feel like I don't know anything about what this means. So can you give us a really quick overview of why spawning aggregation is even a thing?
Well, spawning aggregation, it's a phenomenon where fish, certain species of fish, they travel to a specific site at certain specific times of the year to reproduce, basically. The fish, in this case, we're talking about the NASA groupers, which is an iconic species throughout the Caribbean. And these fish travel to these specific sites. In Belize, there are about 13 fully protected SPAG sites, spawning aggregation sites. So they go to these sites, and it's usually right after the full moon, a few days after the full moon, and the fish display different moods. They display different colors depending on their moods. And it's usually the female leads the dance, what we call a dance. She goes up into the air, followed by the male fish, which are usually displaying like a bicolor, and she releases eggs, they release sperm, and fertilization occurs. So it's just the reproduction of these fish at these sites.
Okay. And there's an entire working group committed to this whole process.
Right.
And which both of you are part of in collaboration with the Wildlife Conservation Fund and the University of Belize.
Wildlife Conservation Society.
Right. And the University of Belize.
Yes.
Okay. So what is the purpose of the working group?
So the working group, as the name suggests, is a group of various organizations working together. The mission, the primary mission is focusing on the spawning aggregations in Belize. And it was formed probably
2001.
Yes, 2001, when you had a whole coming together of various organizations, the Fishes Department, fishermen, NGOs like WCS, the organizations co-managing marine reserves, people like Belize Audubon Society, TIDE, so the Toledo Institute for Development and Environment, and so forth. And they all came together recognizing the problem that existed, where we were seeing disappearances of these spawning aggregations, which historically you would have tens of thousands of fish at these sites every year, a few days after the moon, consistently. And over time they noticed, especially the fishermen, realized that we were having these reductions in numbers, and as a result they were seeing less and less of the groupers. So based on that threat, the group came together, lobbied for the protection of these 13 sites, as Virginia mentioned, and the focus was Nassau, or still is Nassau, because it is an endangered species, which means that across the world populations have gone so low that it's beyond threat, and it's critically endangered, right? So that's the last step before, well,
extinction. What
we don't want, extinction.
What were the contributing factors as to why spawning was considerably reduced at these respective sites?
These are vulnerable sites, because when these fish when they aggregate in large numbers. So it's spawning aggregation fishing. They're all there, so it's easier to extract them. Imagine if you're fishing with one line, you have to wait until a fish bites. But you go to this area where there are thousands of fish, that's easy to extract. And so this is the situation throughout the Caribbean, where even in areas in the Bahamas, spawning aggregation sites in Bahamas, they've been completely fished out. And so they're very vulnerable to fishing, especially in their peak months between December and March, when they're usually aggregating. This is the time they're targeted.
Let me ask a question here. Does this have to do with educating fishermen as well? Simply because I could recall people would say the best time to go fish the certain time of the month or whatsoever when all these fish are congregated, so to speak, gill nets and all, because it gives a greater yield or a larger haul. Is this a matter of being able to educate fishermen that these sites are off limits and these specific cycles, so to speak, should be avoided?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's been a lot of that done, and the working group does that on a continuous basis, and that's something you have to continuously educate, and we update them, inform on the results on, okay, this every year this is what we're finding, these are what the numbers are looking like, and they understand for the most part why it was necessary to protect, and they're generally, I think, supportive of it. But, you know, if over time, you know, there are other issues, if over time we don't have the enforcement we need and so on, you don't see the sites working as they should, then they will say, well, okay, well, why are we still working towards this? But for the most part, the fishermen do understand that by fishing all these fish that are all together at this point in time, numbers are falling, because they were seeing it. And so that made them very supportive of saying, okay, we do need to do something about it.
Can I ask, what are some of the other techniques or other strategies that the working group has come up with in order to not only protect, but maybe even rehabilitate the spawning aggregation? I know that it might not be as simple as, oh, well, maybe we can reintroduce them or introduce them to another area that they can aggregate. But what are some of the strategies that have come up as a result of the working group?
Well, major accomplishments include the closed season. So from the beginning of December to the end of March, it is illegal to fish Nassau grouper, completely closed. At all these 13 sites, they are fully protected. So year round, you should not be at these spawning aggregation sites fishing Nassau grouper. The Nassau grouper has to be landed whole. There's a minimum and maximum size limit, and this is really to give the fish an opportunity to reproduce at least once in their life cycle. And so the working group has really, as we mentioned, it's a network, so all these different NGOs are there, and so we're moving in the same direction together. We monitor our respective sites, we make recommendations, we all come to the table. In fact, yesterday we had the first meeting for the year, and so these are some of the major accomplishments, which is really good for Belize, because compared to other Caribbean countries, I mean, we are so advanced in terms of policy and what we already have legislated. So those are the accomplishments. But I think what's lacking right now, as we see declining numbers in what we used to consider viable sites, is enforcement. The enforcement really needs to improve, and this is at all sites.
The enforcement would be carried out by the fisheries department. How does that aspect of it work in terms of the personnel required to manage, or well, not manage, monitor and supervise these specific sites?
It's a combination of the fisheries department and the various co-managers that manage these sites on site. They're conservation officers or rangers. And for the last couple of years, we've been working to partner with the Coast Guard also to give assistance to that, because it takes a lot of coordinated effort to have enough manpower and, you know, resources to get out there and monitor and patrol these areas, because all of them are off what we call elbows. They're in open water, they're deep, it's usually rough, and so it's challenging to go there and patrol.
So what did we see in 2016? When we look at the review of the past 12 months, what have we observed in terms of either trends, patterns? What do we take away from 2016?
Well, really, when we say 2016, we're referring to the 2016, 2017. So most organizations start to monitor from December 2016 and are still monitoring. So it's usually a few days after the full moon for 5 days. And for the most part, we are seeing declining numbers. For Northeast Point at Glover's, where WCS monitors, we were just there last week, and the maximum average was 138. And this is a site where you used to see about 3,000 fish in the around 2001. Unfortunately, we find evidence of illegal fishing. We found 3 anchors at the site, huge anchors at the site just last week. We find long lengths of ropes, hooks and lines. Sometimes you're seeing these Nassau groupers swimming with hooks in the, in the mouth. And it's clear that there's illegal fishing happening there. And, even with the efforts of the patrol, this is still happening because a lot of this takes place at night. And as Leandra mentioned, these sites are at the elbow, it's rough, it's in deep water, sometimes it's difficult to get to these areas. Right, so in other sites, for some sandbore, for example, that is monitored by the Belize Audubon Society. Fortunately, they are still seeing good numbers at this site, but they did report at yesterday's meeting that for the first time they saw evidence of illegal fishing, which is very sad for that site, which could mean that if they're, they keep going to Glover's and eventually they'll just move to the next viable site,
So the working group, our discussions yesterday, we are concerned with the trend that we're seeing now, and we had a lengthy discussion strategizing ways of how we can work, with the Fisheries Department, the Coast Guard, to see how we can improve, I guess, enforcement to prevent further declines, because Northeast Point and Sandbore were 2 of our best sites that really had large numbers still, several thousands. Most other sites have under 100 or less. The site we monitor in Turniff was a recovering site because for many years we didn't see any fish, and now we're seeing between 300 and 400 fish. So, it is disturbing that we're now seeing these trends, and we are going to be seeing how we can work to prevent.
Is there a long-term plan in terms of looking at these sites that have been designated I'd want to see, and looking at how the population of fish species that spawn at these sites would grow, let's say over a 10-year period or what have you? Is there some kind of long-term plan in place for something like that?
I think we're in our long-term plan, because this really started from around 2001 when everybody interested and involved came together to sound the alarm that we have declining numbers, and it's very disturbing. And so with the working group and all these different NGOs and the Fisheries Department, everybody on board, I think we are in our long-term plan. We continue to monitor these sites. We continue to do outreach. You guys air our TV spot around this time. We have newsletters, we have annual reports. We have representation from the different fishing associations. So the Sartaneja Fishing Association, there's the Hopkins Fishing Association, the Placencia Cooperatives, they all sit at the working group. And so they are engaged, they are involved, they are telling us what they see out there. So I think we are in our long-term plan right now.
I know you mentioned earlier that this issue is regional, it's not just here in Belize.
Certainly.
But is there any move to collaborate with other organizations such as the WCS and other working groups to pull together ideas or new ways on how you can not only just promote the awareness and the will to care enough to make sure that this is enforced in the way that it needs to be?
Well, just last year we started discussions with Mexicans. They've been working a lot on getting themselves organized, and Belize has been a model to a lot of people in the region. So they have their working group, and they want to learn whatever lessons from us. And so we have started a discussion with them on collaborating, and it makes sense because Mexico is our neighbor to our north, and they have quite a few aggregations also. And they are very interested in seeing how they can help to kind of revitalize these areas. And it's quite likely that there's some connectivity between definitely our northern sites and their sites. Beyond that, I know that we do, through WCS, we've had collaborations with Dr. Yvonne Sadovi, who is one of the leading spawning aggregation experts. She's provided us with a lot of training in the past for methodologies to do the monitoring and sampling. And I think, you know, just in terms of the relationships with our organizations and fisheries, there is exchange across the region. But, you know, definitely Mexico, we're looking as a way of exploring collaboration with them.
How aggressive are the fines or the penalties for persons who aren't within the fisheries arena? For instance, the restaurants, the local people who purchase the group, or maybe they are not aware that, you know, it's
out of season. Yeah,
or they're, you know, subject to almost extinction at this point. How important, one, and how aggressive is it that you need to be as a working group and, you know, in collaboration with the fisheries department to ensure that the public is also aware that this is an issue and it needs to be addressed?
It's a good question.
We're not involved, as you mentioned. The fisheries department is really the authority as it relates to any level of enforcement, or unless you're co-managers to a park, then you would also be enforcing as well. But I believe with those cases, it's really a follow-through. It's getting the evidence that so it's not just word of mouth that you went to a restaurant and you see that they have NASA grouper out of season. It's that legal aspect of it and making sure you have evidence and being able to carry through everything. But there are penalties, and in fact, there is a revision of the fisheries bill right now. So we hope that once that is passed, some of these issues will be addressed even more.
And just to add to that, I believe that the fisheries department, with some of the NGOs, have been working on a campaign. What is it? A media campaign to educate the public. Is it Eat Right? Fish Right,
yes,
Eat
Fish Right, Eat Right.
Fish Right, Eat Right.
Right.
Trying to promote responsible practices for people who purchase fish and eat fish, to have them understand, you know, why it's important for these seasons, why we must follow the regulations and not have out of season products, and how that affects the industry, but also overall in terms of the environment.
I think maybe to an extent, and I'm just putting this out there, it may very well be an uphill battle, because the average Belizean consumer seems to be ingrained in their mentality that, you know what, there's a certain time of year, like for Easter, for instance, where this is what I want, this is what can be provided to me on the black market. Even if it is out of season, you have people in the industry who are still able to provide certain fisheries or marine products, that it totally goes against what you would want to be able to put out there in terms of awareness and what have you.
Yeah, I had this conversation recently, and the thing with getting these messages across to the public is that it's, you know, these aren't like charismatic species, whereas if you see an elephant or a rhino or a, you know, them being poached or hurt in any way, people are a little bit more emotional about things like that. But when you tell people, you know what, the numbers are declining, this will affect the fishery, it's a commercial species, it means that fishermen cannot make as much money on this species as they can with anything else. And when they fish down one species, they will move to another one, right? So it's really trying to get the message out, and I think that's why we're here this morning. It's an alarming situation, and I think the more outreach, but what Belizeans can do is not buy NASA grouper in a closed season. You know, it has to be landed whole, you know, and if there are some laws in place, and if we try to, you know, do the little that we can do, you know, I think we can make a difference. The public can make a difference.
It's important to stick in there. As you say, it's an uphill battle, but as you said, it's uphill, right? It's not downhill. So we keep going up, and we just have to keep at it.
Well, before we wrap up our conversation, and I know that we're right now on the topic of an uphill battle, do you think that there is a light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, we have to. We have to. Yeah,
that's why we're here.
Where, you know, and an example of that is Emily, which is a site near Saltwater Key. This site has been fished from the 60s. You know, this is really one of the first aggregation sites in Belize, where like there's record that 300 boats would go to this site and take out tons of fish in one day. You know, and this site has been monitored from 2001 as well. And in the past few years, they've counted 2 fish, no fish. 2 years ago, in 2014 and 2015, the records were in the thousands again. And so it's really a matter of implementing these rules that we already have and beefing up enforcement. That is really key right now, enforcement.
Well, and education.
And education, certainly.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining us this morning. This has been quite an informative conversation, and we hope that as the public you are more aware now and more you care a little bit more about the Nassau grouper. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We are going to take a quick break, Isani, and when we come back, it's to talk to representatives from NAC to talk to us about their upcoming concert this Friday. So stay tuned.